Hi, I'm Aaron Brown, and welcome to another episode of Gen Z Deep Dive. This is a special episode that we have with Ryan Craig. Ryan has written a book called A New You or A New University, and he is getting the word out how Gen Z and their parents can help make better plans for Gen Z's career and strategies for pursuing education that is gainful employment. Ryan shares a lot of insights, and we will be including links to his materials. I highly encourage you to go and read his books, especially if you have a Gen Z aged up and coming student who is about to graduate high school, or a Gen Z student that may seem a little lost. Let's dive right in. Fine. First, let me say it's a great pleasure to have you on Gen Z Deep Dive. I came across your work while reading Harvard Business Review, and you've written several books, including College Disrupted, The Great Unbundling of Higher Education, and your most recent book, A New You, Faster plus Cheaper Alternatives to College. Both can be found on Amazon and, in my opinion, are well worth reading if you're Gen Z aged or the parents and mentors of a Gen Z aged person. So just diving right in your book, A New You, you paint a landscape where the quality of a college education has both diminished, and you seem to say a college education has become inconsequential for the job market. Can you paint a picture for our listeners of how a college education today is not the quality it once was?
Well, let me just start by saying, I think from a quality standpoint, America's colleges and universities do as good a job as they've ever done at equipping young people with the critical thinking skills, cognitive skills, executive function skills, communication skills that they need. The challenge is that the job landscape has changed underneath the feet of colleges and universities, and that is resulting in a significant reduction in the return on investment from a college degree. We know 43% of young people out of college, college graduates, are underemployed. So they're not unemployed, they're underemployed, which means they're working in a job that they probably could have gotten without all the time and cost and debt of that degree. Lots of stories of college graduates who are working in retail, working in food service, and oftentimes when you have tens of thousands of dollars of loans to pay back, you're going to take the first job, which will allow you to make those loan payments. And maybe you're not engaging in the kind of strategic, patient job search that would have netted you that good first job. We know from research that if you don't have a good first job, 2/3 of the time, meaning if you're underemployed in your first job, 2/3 of the time you'll be underemployed 5 years later, and half the time you'll be underemployed 10 years later.
Mm.
Not surprising because careers are path dependent. Your second employer is going to care a lot about what your first job was, and your third employer will care a lot about what your second and first job were. So if you're not in a good first job, you're not on the right path effectively. Colleges and universities aren't particularly aligned to helping you get that good first job. If you go to a college campus, they'll direct you to career services. They're the ones who are responsible for this. It's probably located on the periphery of campus, probably not open on nights or weekends. And if you visit, you're probably not going to talk to someone who's actually from an industry you're trying to learn more about or get networked into. You're probably going to be talking with someone who is a lifelong career services employee, which would be great if the jobs of the future were in career services, but I don't think that they are. So not surprisingly, about half of all college graduates have never availed themselves of career services at all. That's one issue. The second is that college curricula is not particularly well aligned to what employers are looking for. I use the example of there was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is sort of the Bible of the college and university world, this newspaper that everyone reads. And this was a couple years ago, and it was a fairly laudatory article about a new bachelor's degree program in cybersecurity that Texas A&M University had launched. And it went on to say all these good things about the degree program and how great it was that A&M had been able to launch it in such a short period of time. But then it asked, but isn't this a trap? Because the kinds of skills that they'll be learning in this program, won't they be obsolete in 5 or 10 years? And so stop for a minute and just ask yourself, in what other industry would the view be that let's not develop this new product or service because it could be obsolete in 5 or 10 years? But that really is the prevailing view in higher education, the sense that we prepare you for the eternal skills. We prepare you for your fifth job, not for your first job. We know now if you don't get a good first job, as we just said, you probably won't get a good fifth job. So that's kind of what's broken. If you actually look at what these good first jobs are, right? College graduates, what are the jobs that college graduates want? The jobs that'll pay you 50K or more with a bunch of career paths up and out. You're working for a mid-sized or large organization of some kind. You're using some kind of software platform to help manage some kind of business function, right? It doesn't sound particularly sexy, but that is the fact of entry level jobs. And colleges neither train on the software platform nor on what these businesses are or how they do or how these industries work. They just don't. Even if you're a business major, you don't learn. You don't learn that. I was talking to a group of a couple hundred college and university presidents and provosts a few months ago, and I said, put up your hands if your institution provides any training at all on Salesforce, which is the number one SaaS platform, CRM platform used in American business. Not one hand went up. And while I'm sure that some of their institutions did, they may not have known. It proves the point that colleges and universities just aren't doing that kind of training. There's a little bit of what I call the myth of the digital native, which is the sense millennials and now Gen Z, they don't need to be trained on this stuff because they're digital natives, right? They know how to use their iPhone. They know how to use Netflix or Spotify, right? But it's a long way from knowing how to use Spotify to understanding how to use an electronic medical records system, which really literally requires hundreds of hours of training to master all the functionality. And the reason is that these software SaaS platforms, we've essentially replicated the entire, all of the functions of the business into that software platform. If you don't understand how the business works, you won't be able to understand how to use that software platform. But meanwhile, so that's the higher education side of it. But on the employer side of it, in addition to the fact that work has changed, hiring has changed. So when I graduated 25 years ago, I literally sent out paper resumes and cover letters, signed each one. Took me probably, I don't know, half an hour to send out each one. Mm-hmm. Today, in half an hour, you could probably apply to 100 different jobs, right? It's so easy. They're all online. So every online job generates 300, 400, 500 resumes. No human hiring manager at the employer is looking at that number of applicants. They're all using what are called applicant tracking systems to screen the resumes to determine which ones I should actually look at. Now, how do these applicant tracking systems work? It's a keyword-based filter. It's looking at the keywords in the job description and matching the keywords they can parse from your resume. And if you don't have sufficient keyword density in your resume, if you don't have enough matches, you'll be invisible, literally. At the same time, over the last decade, the number of keywords in entry-level job descriptions that are technical or digital in nature now exceeds all other keywords combined in the job description. So if you don't have those digital, and there's a good reason for that and a bad reason for that, right? The good reason is these jobs are digital jobs, as we've discussed. The bad reason is there are only so many ways to say problem solving, communication skills, critical thinking, but you can always add a software product or platform to a job description. Yeah. And so we're indexing, in a sense, on these digital skills that higher education isn't training on. So that gives you a sense of sort of why millennials and now Gen Z are kind of in trouble and really need to think twice as they're making an enrollment decision in a college program. First of all, not all colleges are created equal. I think most people understand that. Graduating from a selective brand name school is going to give you a much better shot than graduating from a school that no one's ever heard of. And at the same time, graduating with a degree in some sort of IT field is probably going to give you a leg up over graduating, even in what I call sort of a paraprofessional or a pseudo-professional field, like a business major. You think that, I can get a job in business by majoring in business. in many schools, business majors have the worst outcomes because they're not actually training you for the entry level jobs that schools are looking for, and you might be at a disadvantage relative to someone who's majored in the humanities, for example, even for those jobs. So all those things are true, but I think what's fair to say is that relative to the alternatives, when I graduated, not going to college was essentially signing your, sort of a death wish, career death wish, right? Like every good job that I could have possibly wanted 25 years ago would have absolutely required a college degree.
Yep.
Today, that's not necessarily true. In fact, there was an announcement today that came out. 15 large companies, including Apple and a whole bunch of other ones, are now removing degree requirements from cybersecurity jobs. There are other firms like Ernst & Young, Penguin Random House, that not only are removing degree requirements, some of them are actually hiding whether candidates have degrees or not from hiring managers, because I think it's a misleading indicator of whether someone's going to be a successful candidate. So I'm not saying college is a bad decision.
Yeah.
I'm saying that if you look at the average return on investment on a college degree relative to the return on investment on not going to college, whereas a generation ago, that gap was wide and clear. Mm-hmm. Today, it's probably still wide for most people, but there are definitely a large and growing subset of people for whom that gap may be, again, relative to your what college you might be going to, and the cost and the debt and the employment outcomes, where that gap might be slim to none or negative, meaning you might be better off choosing an alternative pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you're saying, I spent 10 years in higher ed administration, taught in business schools in Oklahoma. And I just remember the career services was like tucked away, like really tucked away, far away in the catacombs of the university, and didn't always seem that helpful if you didn't have a professor that was going to bat for you with with their contacts, things like that. So tons of challenges there. So in your Harvard Business Review article, it's titled, "Will a Bachelor's Degree Matter as Much for Gen Z?" You write that many millennials and potentially Gen Z are underemployed. And once you're underemployed, it's difficult to break that cycle. So from your work, you seem to think there are better options for Gen Z and millennials than pursuing a college education. You've spoken to that just a little bit in the previous question. What are some of those options, and why are those options viable for some millennials and Gen Z?
Sure. So what's interesting is that we're seeing the emergence of these, what I call faster and cheaper pathways to good jobs. What they have in common is they all employ what I call last mile training, which is, instead of sort of thinking about, everything we've done in education heretofore has always been what I call left to right, meaning middle school builds on grade school, high school builds on what you learned in middle school, and college builds on what you learned in high school. And it's sort of a general education. Last mile training starts from the standpoint of, let's look at that first job and let's look at what employers are actually looking for that first job. And let's sort of design backwards. Let's design right to left from that first job. And what employers are looking for is a combination of digital skills, business knowledge, understanding the business, and soft skills. Now, if you can't problem solve your way out of a paper bag, they're not going to hire you for that job. So I'm assuming some basic level of, critical thinking, problem solving skills, but probably not a level that requires, 4 years of magna cum laude, performance. So that's what we're talking about. And these programs take numerous forms. There are tuition-based bootcamp programs, coding, UI, UX, sales, digital marketing, cybersecurity. There are programs that don't charge you tuition at all, that use what's called an income share agreement. And what that means is that you don't pay anything, but you sign a contract which says that once you graduate, assuming you make above, $40,000 a year, so If you don't make above that, if it doesn't work for you, you don't pay anything. But if you do, then you might share, I don't know, 15% of your gross income for 2 or 3 years with the provider.
I'm actually sold one of those right now, and it's a really cool and neat opportunity for a lot of people. So yeah, just
well, what it signals that they're aligned with you, right? Your typical college or university, they don't make any more money or less money, whether you get a job at Saks or you're working at Starbucks.
Right.
So you know that they've got your back, and that is that is helpful. We're most interested actually in those that don't where there's no financial risk at all to the student, and where you're actually paid from day one of the program, kind of like an apprenticeship model. You earn while you learn, and those programs take various forms, but they're either in staffing companies or business services companies that are really providing these new pipelines and really providing talent to their clients as well. So we're excited about those models. But the best way for your listeners to look at it is there's an appendix in the book, the new book, A New You, which lists about 300 of these alternative programs, and these are all alternative pathways to jobs in IT and healthcare. We've intentionally omitted programs that lead to blue collar, industrial, building trade jobs. Not that those are bad jobs, but the point here is to emphasize that these are new economy jobs, and these are these are new pathways that are leading to them. There's a group down in Florida that took that appendix and put it online in a searchable database, so your listeners can find it at alternativestocollege.com.
Okay.
And they keep it up to date. And that's a good way to ascertain whether there might be a faster and cheaper alternative available. And as I say in the book, if you get into a selective university, and keep in mind that there are only 200 of them in the country that accept fewer than 50%. So if you get into one of those 200, then and it's affordable, and I have a sort of test to say whether it's affordable for you and your family, you should absolutely go do that. There's no question about it. You will get a better outcome 9 times out of 10 than not doing that, right? But unfortunately, that's a very small minority of people find themselves in that fortunate position. Most of whom are from very wealthy families, obviously, in terms of what's affordable. So if you're not, then it really the college choice shouldn't be a question of just which college to go to. It should be a question of, well, which pathway should I choose? And maybe it's a college pathway, or maybe it's an alternative pathway that leads you with greater probability into a good first job without really any financial risk at all. And I'm not arguing that in this global knowledge economy, it's a sensible idea to have less post-secondary education. That's not the point at all. My point is that you should think about how you stage it. So a lot of things now, we used to sort of buy all at one time. We kind of buy what we need when we need it. And higher education is moving in that direction as well. So you might think of yourself as buying a pathway, a faster and cheaper pathway that gets you that good first job, and then working for a couple of years with no debt, and looking around and ascertaining what secondary or tertiary pathway you're going to pursue that will allow you to build those cognitive skills, executive function skills, communication skills, that will allow you to move on, move up, become a manager, and progress in your career. And actually, you're going to be a lot more informed as to what you want at that point than what happens today, which is most young people just sort of blindly go to college. And I'm pretty sanguine in the book. I talk about, I recognize that things get lost in that trade-off, right? Fun, for sure. That's going to be less fun, probably. You're going to have, fewer fraternity keg parties. You'll also have less of a experience of discovery and serendipity that happens a lot of college, where you sort of, you find what color's your parachute because you happen to take a class, you had a roommate who, or, you meet a girl or a boyfriend who they turn you on to something different. You may have less of that in this model. But my concern is that if you just look at the economic performance of millennials, you see that they've fallen behind prior generations on every economic metric.
Even
we're in a
Gen
situation
X.
now where, pardon?
Even Gen X, they've fallen behind Gen X.
Yes, they've fallen well behind Gen X.
Wow. Okay, I
Yeah.
was not aware of that. That's
Yeah. In terms
amazing.
of wealth, in terms of income, in terms of home ownership, in terms of new business creation, they're well behind. And it's a function of two things. It's a function of student loan debt, and it's a function of their employment outcomes. So that's where we are. So I think we're in a situation where when you look at the polls, north of 50% of millennials don't believe in capitalism
Mhm.
anymore. That's the problem, I think. Some would
I agree
disagree.
with you. I agree with
And then you have some who are sort of going the other way and engaging in sort of extreme right wing behavior.
you.
I think a lot of extreme a lot of the economic, social, and political alienation and extreme behavior we're seeing is a product of the fact that we really only have one pathway, one surefire pathway it's not surefire. It's one pathway to getting to buying a lottery ticket, to
Yeah,
getting a good first job. And if we had 1,000 different pathways, all of which were different, exhibited different sort of risk return profiles, I think people who feel kind of shut out of the dynamic American economy would probably feel different. It would moderate their views and behavior.
yeah.
So this is the single biggest issue we face as a country.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. So much to chew on there, and so much to think about. Um, so you mentioned at the back of your book, A New You, which I encourage everybody that's listening, um, go on Amazon or your Barnes and Noble, whatever it is that you use to purchase your books, and check out this book, especially if you have a Gen Z aged young person considering college, or as a family, you guys are considering college, career, all of those things. Um, but I kind of want to circle back and really emphasize. So, if you're Gen Z, how do you find these opportunities? You mentioned last mile programs, boot camps. How do you become aware of these opportunities? I'm in and out of the middle and high schools here in Colorado Springs, and at some I've only seen college fairs. I'm not seeing tech. I'm not seeing boot camps offered, things like that. So what is a Gen Zer to do? Where are some of the better places they can go to come into contact with this information?
Yeah, no, I'd recommend the website. Like I said, alternativestocollege.com. It's a great place to start. You don't have to buy the book. It's for indebted millennials and Gen Z to have to spend another whatever it is, $20 on a book. So it's online at alternativestocollege.com, and you
Okay.
can search various criteria and determine whether there's a faster and cheaper pathway. That some of them are online, that makes it easy. But
Okay. Awesome.
in person, and you can find one that's in an industry that you're interested in and accessible to you.
Awesome. So last question, Ryan. So we talked about parents. You've given us a lot of great resources online that we can go to, and parents can go to, Gen Z can go to. But if you're an employer and experiencing a STEM gap in your company, where can that employer go to find people with the skills that they need?
Yeah. Well, the hard part is that for most employers, the top of their hiring funnel is broken. The way to think about hiring is a funnel. When you have 500 resumes coming in for every slot and you're only looking at 20 or 30 of them, you have to think about top of funnel
Mhm.
and then funnel. So top
Okay.
of the funnel, now you're just using a keyword match, and employers do not pay enough attention to their job descriptions in terms of what's in there and what's not in there.
Hmm.
So, like I said earlier, you have companies like Apple now who are removing degrees from job descriptions because
Yeah.
they feel that's their top of the funnel is broken. What happens when your top of the funnel is broken is when you get down the funnel, you have I don't know, maybe 100 false negatives, and of your 30 that you're looking at, maybe 20 of them are false positives, right? And you
Mhm.
spend all time and energy on the interview process, and you're interviewing the wrong people effectively because your top of the funnel is broken.
Yeah.
If I were a business owner, if I owned a company of, I don't know, 500,000 employees, I'd be very focused on those job those job descriptions and what we're doing at the top of the funnel and how we can do more to make sure that we're seeing a representative, diverse set of candidates who really match the skill profile that we're looking for, as opposed to a set of keywords that someone knocks off in 5 minutes because they have to complete a job description.
Right. Wow, that's so good. We have listeners that come from different walks of life, so I'm excited that we can hit the business aspect or the organizational aspect and the parent aspect. So Ryan, again, thank you so much for being on the show. And where can people go to connect with you online, such as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook? What's the
Yeah,
best
best is
place?
Twitter.
Okay.
I'm at Ryan Craig, at Ryan Craig AP. That's
Okay.
like a Ryan Gap for Skills Gap. And I also publish a bi-weekly newsletter on all things Skill Gap related. You can see that at gapletter.com.
Fantastic. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show. It's really meant a lot that you've been a part of Gen Z Deep Dive, and we really appreciate sharing what you do for millennials and Gen Z.
Thanks very much, Aaron. Appreciate it.